I was on vacation recently in the islands, so down in the Bahamas. So I usually bring lots of art materials with me when I do rarely have a bit of a vacation time, or if I'm going to be sitting around for a little bit. So I was looking for an idea or a subject matter that I could do a finished piece of out of my head. Because that's the thing for me, is that if I don't have reference readily available, sometimes I like to try to produce something that I've planned onto paper out of my head without any reference as best I can. This was a piece that I was doing on the beach, slightly inspired by the environment that I was in, of course, because you're in the Caribbean and you think pirates and underwater and sea monsters and stuff like that. So this is kind of a take on a common sea monster. To be absolutely honest, I don't remember the name of it. Maybe I'll put it up right here. I'll put up the name of what they're actually called, because it's not just the character from A Little Mermaid. It's also that's it. That's what it was. Couldn't remember, so I wrote it here. So I thought it'd be fun to have her underwater with a tank diver who was trying to get treasure. So it was kind of a nice little story to tell here. So I did this piece on the beach, and it worked pretty well. Like, I really am rather proud of the anatomy within her body and his body. I mean, so I'm sure anatomy experts will tell me that his muscular structure is not right, but hey, I'm learning. And I didn't have any reference with me, so I was going from basic memory. I really like their hands in this. Their hands work. All four examples of hands here I'm relatively happy with, because they're dynamic, they're moving, they feel relatively real. They don't just feel like clubs, which is always the difficult thing. And of course, I'm playing with trying to demonstrate depth with some simple shading lines, where you can see the fingers deeper in the background. I've hatched quite a bit. So I'm relatively happy with this. When I was doing this piece, I didn't have these underwater plants in the background originally. It was really just a plain empty white background with the bubbles to demonstrate that they're underwater. So there's two things. One, there's no depth or background or texture to it. And two, there was no contrast behind the main figure to create some contrast within the piece. So there wasn't any of that behind it. So I put the shadows of these seaweed structures behind her, now pulled from reference on my phone, but it's working and it's not working because it's a little too busy, I find. It's a little too busy, even though it does have some nice contrast elements behind her. It's a little too busy. The other things I didn't like that didn't really work were the way I was trying to add shadowing and shading to all of her tentacles, which are kind of a random mass. So I did show this piece to a few friends and colleagues, and one of the first things that they suggested was, her tentacles don't seem to be motivated by where they are. So you seem to see a whole bunch of them. You're not really sure where they're attaching to her body, and are there more than 8 or less than 8? Like, it's a bit random. I was okay with that, relatively speaking, but I see what they mean. I also was trying stippling by adding little dots in to add texture. It feels out of place, I think, in the overall piece, considering that most of my shading is done with hatching. Stippling seems weird. The other note that somebody gave me was, he's kneeling on the ground and they're underwater, so why not take advantage of the fact that the characters are underwater, so they can be floating? So that was an interesting observation from somebody else's point of view, to say, while their positioning is dynamic, you missed an opportunity, or I missed an opportunity, to tell the story in the environment that it is in, which is underwater, which is, again, would also help make it believable that they are underwater in a two-dimensional line drawing, because he'd be floating. So what I did is, when I came home, I decided to redraw the same scenario, taking some of the notes and lessons, and try to reapply it in a slightly different way in the same story. First and foremost, I took the characters, brought them up off the ground, did it on a bigger canvas, or I used the guidelines that I spoke about a couple episodes ago, that I've been learning from Mark Schultz, And obviously that is all talking about the golden mean, the rule of thirds, both in the sense of the triangles and also the hatches this way, dividing the page into thirds from all angles, and then trying to put the point of focus or the main points of focus within the piece along those lines or where those lines converge, because that is always going to be the most interesting place to put them. So right away, placing her body along the convergence of the 1/3 this way, his body along the convergence of the 1/3 this way, especially his head is right on that convergence there, or that line there of the third. Using another technique I was pulling out of another drawing book. I buy a lot of learning how to draw books that are good, that I can find that speak to me when I look at them. And one of the things that one of them was talking about was using these opposing curves. So her body is in this position, her action is in this position, his body is in the counter curve this way. It's not exactly perfect, but the idea is there, is countering those curves. And then using the background elements to accentuate those shapes. So you can see how the rock formation goes like this behind her, and the ground formation has a general movement this way with the rock to complement his body positioning. Within the storytelling of the scene, I also brought her other arm, her left arm up and not holding on to his. Her right arm is essentially the same as the other drawing, because I was quite happy with that. With him, I positioned the treasure which he is reaching for behind him, so that it's actually more dynamic, because he's being pulled away and he's reaching back towards us, so it creates an illusion of three-dimensionality. Because he's reaching back towards it, it creates the illusion of action and movement, even though it's all two-dimensional static. And then I took the opportunity again of using the octopus tentacles that she has on her lower half of her body to wrap around his arms and hold him back in that action. So originally, when I penciled this, I didn't want to mess up the pencil by inking it, so I tried light tabling. Now, light tabling is a method where, if you don't know, it's where you take literally what it sounds like a box, or in this case, I put a light underneath the glass table that I draw on, and that shines a light through underneath the artwork. You put another piece of paper on top, then you trace your piece. Now, that is a really good method of doing quick and dirty roughs, especially with comics, to do like your layouts and really, really loose gestures. Take a fresh piece of paper, and you can oftentimes in the old days, they would blow that up on a photocopier, because you would do your layouts very small. You'd blow that up to the full size, you'd put your comic page over top, and then do the finer pencils over top of your gestures, just to keep you going. Now, I tried inking over top of, directly, just inking over top of the light table, and I think with a little practice, I could probably get it. I wasn't super happy with the outcome I was getting. I didn't feel like I could see the page under a surface light enough to see where I was laying down lines. I was more looking at, I found myself distracted in looking at the pencils that were bleeding through, which weren't necessarily clear, because of course you're putting light through another piece of paper underneath. So didn't work very well for me, so I decided, forget it, I'll ink the original piece, which is why it does have a little bit of a rough, you can see the blue line, you can see the pencil, and I haven't chosen yet to erase that, which is okay. I like that. I like to feel the process in a piece like this. This isn't anything other than myself and learning how to draw. I'm just doing these pieces for myself, so it doesn't really matter. And then further to that, once I took it to that place, then I started experimenting with adding in a large amount of black behind her that would imitate the shadow that's underneath this rock. And then, because that was just an empty black space, I used white gouache to paint in the reflections on the surface of the rock to imitate the other pieces that were in the light section, so that you have this flow of the cracks of the rock, and hopefully it all brings it together and gives it some texture in the contrasty part behind her, and then again draws the eye into where she is. Then using other elements like the swooping cable and the fish and the bubbles to create a flowy, bubbly underwater feel. So I hope that this piece and the lessons I've learned in it help you, as I've just kind of reflecting myself on what is working and what isn't. I'm still not 100% happy in this. Never, I don't think I ever will be, with little things like just the rendering itself. I'm a little bit impatient yet. I'm still rendering things too fast. And I think that with a little bit more time and patience, I would be able to get a better result. Some of the anatomy, his feet are a little long, so that's not right. I'm not super happy with the anatomy of his body and his arm here because it's in an awkward position. It's sometimes hard to represent that anatomy, so I didn't do a perfect job there. Some of the hatching is a little inconsistent, where it's really fine and refined here. It's much bigger and unrefined in areas here and here, so it needs to be a little bit more consistent, and then it would be less dirty. Again, that would also apply to the rock in the background. What isn't working is some of the hatching, again, is inconsistent because I'm not quite confident in what I'm doing there. I am making it up as I go along. So these are things that I see that are wrong with it. Feel free to add comments of what you see also that is incorrect or would make it better, because that helps me, because then I can carry that to the next piece and then talk about those lessons that I've learned in that piece. So it's all about, this continues to be all about me learning how to draw. So it's all, and then telling you the lessons that I learned. So because immediately after that piece, I did this one, and I will be really brief on this. It's not a finished piece. It's a John Carter of Mars scene. I just simply did 3 characters in a background out of my head. The positioning of the background is, and the perspective is a little bit inspired by an art book I was flipping through. I saw a Boris Vallejo piece where there was a rock formation in the distance, and I thought that would be a fun thing to have, that 3 layers of background, foreground, middle ground, and background in a big, vast, epic space. So you have this rock formation up front, this city space in the middle background. It's pretty far deep background, but it's still middle deep background. And then the deepest background is just these mountains in a desert on Mars, and then there's some moons floating in the sky. Put 3 characters in it, a White Ape, Woola, and John Carter. First and foremost, little nitpicky things on this one. In a perfect world, John would be moved over just a little bit. I wasn't using my guidelines on this, so I was eyeballing the thirds. If he was moved over just a touch, like maybe even just a centimeter or 2, it would feel a little bit more like that flow was working from the moon to the 2 other characters, and it would feel more like it was on a third. Another little thing is this line of the rock formation in the background converges with his forehead in an awkward way, so it feels like his forehead is part of the cliff. So that was a bad design positioning for that line there. That line should maybe be deeper to cut through his body harder, so you can separate him from the background. Otherwise, he feels like he's kind of part of that cliff face, which you don't want. You want that cliff face to feel like it's 100, yards away or however far away it is, and he needs to be in the foreground. Again, hatching and stuff is still rough, but this was just a little fun piece I was doing at the kitchen table at night while I was working on a feature film. So there we go. There's a couple different pieces that I was working on the last little while, and some of the lessons that I learned while doing them. Hopefully you enjoyed, and please, again, comment on any of these because I'd love to hear where I can do better, and then I will share that with the rest of you.